I am my body. I go back to the standard thing. I am my body, and then I want to get that car, and even though I was just about to die a year ago, so that comes rushing back. So consciousness immerses itself fully into a particular headset, gets lost in it, and then slowly wakes up.
Just so it can escape, and that is the waking up. But it needs to have.
It needs to know what it's not. It needs to know what you are. You have to say, oh, I'm not that, I'm not that. That wasn't important, that wasn't important.
That's really powerful. Don, let me just say that because I've been a long-term fan of yours, and we're supposed to have a conversation during this very difficult moment in your life. Let me just say you're a truly special person, and I, for one, and I know there's a lot of others that agree. I'm glad that you're still here with us on this earth, if for a short time. So whatever the universe, whatever plan it has for you, that brought you close to death, to maybe enlighten you some kind of way. I think it has an interesting plan for you. You're one of the truly special humans, and it's a huge honor that you would sit and talk with me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lex. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this conversation.
Yeah, every video I'm looking at, alien, 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 alien. These guys are, oh my god, I don't know if I can do it. I gotta find another person. Oh my god, no. Yeah, almost every video of Lex is, alien. I can't do that. Game theory, AI, alien. Alien. Putin, alien. Jet fighter, UFO, alien. UFO and future of humanity, alien. Joe Rogan, alien. Dark matter and the Big Bang, alien. UFO explained. Climate change, alien. Yep, these guys are all. I'll just go through that again. Look, Lex Friedman, search. Alien, 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 alien. I don't know about that one. Alien, alien, alien. They're selling the whole fake fucking nonsense, man. Alien, alien, UFOs, aliens. What the fuck, man? I'm not doing a series to this guy. Alright, let's find something else. I don't know. Oh my god, yeah, they're all just go and go and go. Hmm. Oh my God, yeah. I never knew that. I never knew that. How bad this is. Oh my God, yeah. That's all he is. That's all Lex is a alien seller. He's a programmer for the alien regime. This guy was alright. Brett Weinstein. Okay, this guy was okay, I remember. Let's go with him for the popular because I got nothing else going on right now. But I like this guy. Brett something. Brett Weinstein.
The following is a conversation with Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologist, author, co-host of the Dark Horse podcast, and, as he says, reluctant radical. Even though we've never met or spoken before this, we both felt like we've been friends for a long time. I don't agree on everything with Brett, but I'm sure as hell happy he exists in this weird and wonderful world of ours. Quick mention of our sponsors: Jordan Harbinger Show, ExpressVPN, Magic Spoon, and Four Sigmatic. Check them out in the description to support this podcast. As a side note, let me say a few words about COVID-19 and about science broadly. I think science is beautiful and powerful.
The question, and I would say, based on the content of the genome and other evidence in publications from the various labs that were involved in generating this technology, a couple of things seem likely. This SARS-CoV-2 does not appear to be entirely the result of either a splicing process or serial passaging. It appears to have both things in its past, or it's at least highly likely that it does. So, for example, the furin cleavage site looks very much like it was added in to the virus, and it was known that that would increase its infectivity in humans and increase its tropism. The virus appears to be excellent at spreading in humans and minks and ferrets. Now, minks and ferrets are very closely related to each other, and ferrets are very likely to have been used in a serial passage experiment, the reason being that they have an ACE2 receptor that looks very much like the human ACE2 receptor. And so, were you going to passage the virus or its ancestor through an animal in order to increase its infectivity in humans, which would have been necessary, ferrets would have been very likely. It is also quite likely that humanized mice were utilized, and it is possible that human airway tissue was utilized. I think it is vital that we find out what the protocols were. If this came from the Wuhan Institute, we need to know it, and we need to know what the protocols were exactly, because they will actually give us some tools that would be useful in fighting SARS-CoV-2 and hopefully driving it to extinction, which ought to be our priority. It's a priority that is not apparent from our behavior, but it really is. It should be our objective. If we understood where our interests lie, we would be much more focused on it. But those protocols would tell us a great deal. If it wasn't the Wuhan Institute, we need to know that. If it was nature, we need to know that. And if it was some other laboratory, we need to figure out who, what, and where, so that we can determine what we can determine about what was done.
You're opening up my mind about why we should investigate, why we should know the truth of the origins of this virus. So for me personally, let me just tell the story of my own kind of journey. When I first started looking into the lab leak hypothesis, what became terrifying to me and important to understand and obvious is the sort of like Sam Harris way of thinking, which is it's obvious that a lab leak of a deadly virus will eventually happen. My mind was, it doesn't even matter if it happened in this case. It's obvious there's going to happen in the future. So why the hell are we not freaking out about this? And COVID-19 is not even that deadly relative to the possible future viruses. It's the way, I disagree with Sam on this, but he thinks about this way about AGI as well, about artificial intelligence. It's a different discussion, I think, but with viruses, it seems like something that could happen on a scale of years, maybe a few decades. AGI is a little bit farther out for me, but it seemed, the terrifying thing, it seemed obvious that this will happen very soon for a much deadlier virus as we get better and better at both engineering viruses and doing this kind of evolutionary driven research, gain of function research. Okay, but then you started speaking out about this as well, but also started to say, no, we should hurry up and figure out the origins now because it will help us figure out how to actually respond to this particular virus, how to treat this particular virus, what is in terms of vaccines, in terms of antiviral drugs, in terms of just all the number of responses we should have. Okay, I still am much more freaking out about the future. Maybe you can break that apart a little bit. Which are you most focused on now? Which are you most freaking out about now in terms of the importance of figuring out the origins of this virus?
I am most freaking out about both of them because they're both really important, and we can put bounds on this. Let me say first that this is a perfect test case for the theory of close calls, because as much as COVID is a disaster, it is also a close call from which we can learn much. You are absolutely right. If we keep playing this game in the lab, if we are not, especially if we do it under pressure, and when we are told that a virus is going to leap from nature any day, and that the more we know, the better we'll be able to fight it, we're going to create the disaster all the sooner. So yes, that should be an absolute focus. The fact that there were people saying that this was dangerous back in 2015 ought to tell us something. The fact that the system bypassed a ban and offshored the work to China ought to tell us this is not a Chinese failure. This is a failure of something larger and harder to see. But I also think that there's a clock ticking with respect to SARS-CoV-2 and COVID, the disease that it creates. And that has to do with whether or not we are stuck with it permanently. So if you think about the cost to humanity of being stuck with influenza, it's an immense cost year after year. And we just stop thinking about it because it's there. Some years you get the flu, most years you don't. Maybe you get the vaccine to prevent it. Maybe the vaccine isn't particularly well targeted. But imagine just simply doubling that cost. Imagine we get stuck with SARS-CoV-2 and its descendants going forward, and that it just settles in and becomes a fact of modern human life. That would be a disaster, right? The number of people we will ultimately lose is incalculable. The amount of suffering that will be caused is incalculable. The loss of well-being and wealth, incalculable. So that ought to be a very high priority, driving this extinct before it becomes permanent. And the ability to drive it extinct goes down the longer we delay effective responses. To the extent that we let it have this very large canvas, large numbers of people who have the disease, in which mutation and selection can result in adaptation that we will not be able to counter, the greater its ability to figure out features of our immune system and use them to its advantage. So I'm feeling the pressure of driving it extinct. I believe we could have driven it extinct 6 months ago, and we didn't do it because of very mundane concerns among a small number of people. And I'm not alleging that they were brazen about or that they were callous about deaths that would be caused. I have the sense that they were working from a kind of autopilot in which let's say you're in some kind of a corporation, a pharmaceutical corporation, you have a portfolio of therapies that in the context of a pandemic might be very lucrative. Those therapies have competitors. You, of course, want to position your product so that it succeeds and the competitors don't. And lo and behold, at some point, through means that I think those of us on the outside can't really intuit, you end up saying things about competing therapies that work better and much more safely than the ones you're selling that aren't true and do cause people to die in large numbers. But it's some kind of autopilot, at least part of it is.
So there's a complicated coupling of the autopilot of institutions, companies, governments, and then there's also the geopolitical game theory thing going on where you want to keep secrets. It's the Chernobyl thing where if you messed up, there's a big incentive, I think, to hide the fact that you messed up. So how do we fix this? And what's more important to fix? The autopilot, which is the response that we often criticize about our institutions, especially the leaders in those institutions, Anthony Fauci and so on, some of the members of the scientific community. And the second part is the game with China of hiding the information in terms of on the fight between nations.
Well, in our live streams on Dark Horse, Heather and I have been talking from the beginning about the fact that although, yes, what happens began in China, it very much looks like a failure of the international scientific community. And that's frightening, but it's also hopeful in the sense that actually if we did the right thing now, we're not navigating a puzzle about Chinese responsibility. We're navigating a question of collective responsibility for something that has been terribly costly to all of us. So that's not a very happy process. But as you point out, what's at stake is in large measure, at the very least, the strong possibility this will happen again, and that at some point it will be far worse. So, just as a person that does not learn the lessons of their own errors doesn't get smarter and they remain in danger, we collectively, humanity, has to say, well, there sure is a lot of evidence that suggests that this is a self-inflicted wound. When you have done something that has caused a massive self-inflicted wound, it makes sense to dwell on it exactly to the point that you have learned the lesson that makes it very, very unlikely that something similar will happen again.
I think this is a good place to kind of ask you to do almost like a thought experiment, or to steelman the argument against the lab leak hypothesis. So if you were to argue, you said 95% chance that the virus leaked from a lab, there's a bunch of ways I think you can argue that even talking about it is bad for the world. So if I just put something on the table, is to say that, so one, it would be racism versus Chinese people, that talking about that it leaked from a lab, there's a kind of immediate kind of blame, and it can spiral down into this idea that's somehow the people are responsible for the virus and this kind of thing. Is it possible for you to come up with other steelman arguments against talking or against the possibility of the lab leak hypothesis?
Well, so I think steel manning is a tool that is extremely valuable, but it's also possible to abuse it. I think that problem.
My video get deleted.
You got a chance to talk with Joe Rogan yesterday?
Yes, I did.
And I just saw the episode was released, and ivermectin is trending on Twitter. Joe told me it was an incredible conversation, and I look forward to listening to it today. Many people have probably, by the time this is released, have already listened to it. I think it would be interesting to discuss a post-mortem. How do you feel how that conversation went? And maybe broadly, how do you see the story as it's unfolding of ivermectin from the origins, from before COVID-19 through 2020 to today?
I very much enjoyed talking to Joe, and I'm undescribably grateful that he would take the risk of such a discussion, that he would, as he described it, do an emergency podcast on the subject, which I think that was not an exaggeration. This needed to happen for various reasons, that he took us down the road of talking about the censorship campaign against ivermectin, which I find utterly shocking, and talking about the drug itself. And I should say, we had Pierre Corey available. He came on the podcast as well. He is, of course, the face of the FLCCC, the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance. These are doctors who have innovated ways of treating COVID patients, and they happened on ivermectin. And really understood that the power of the federal government was so great that it needed to be limited by granting explicitly the right of citizens to say anything. In fact, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook may be more powerful in this moment than the federal government of their worst nightmares could have been. The power that these entities have to control thought and to shift civilization is so great that we need to have those same protections. It doesn't mean that harmful things won't be said, but it means that nothing has changed about the cost-benefit analysis of building the right to censor. So if I were running YouTube, the limit of what should be allowed is the limit of the law, right? If what you are doing is legal, then it should not be YouTube's place to limit what gets said or who gets to hear it. That is between speakers and audience. Will harm come from that? Of course it will. But will net harm come from it? No, I don't believe it will. I believe that allowing everything to be said does allow a process in which better ideas do come to the fore and win out.
So you believe that in the end, when there's complete freedom to share ideas, that truth will win out. So what I've noticed, just as a brief side comment, that certain things become viral irregardless of their truth. I've noticed that things that are dramatic and or funny, like things that become memes, don't have to be grounded in truth. And so that what worries me there is that we basically maximize for drama versus maximize for truth in a system where everything is free. And that's worrying in the time of emergency.
Well, yes, it's all worrying in time of emergency, to be sure. But I want you to notice that what you've happened on is actually an analog for a much deeper and older problem. Human beings we are not a blank slate, but we are the blankest slate that nature has ever devised. And there's a reason for that, right? It's where our flexibility comes from. We are robots in which a large fraction of the cognitive capacity of the behavioral capacity has been offloaded to the software layer, which gets written and rewritten over evolutionary time. That means, effectively, that much of what we are, in fact, the important part of what we are, is housed in the cultural layer and the conscious layer, and not in the hardware hard coding layer. That layer is prone to make errors, right? And anybody who's watched a child grow up knows that children make absurd errors all the time, right? It's part of the process, as we were discussing earlier. It is also true that as you look across a field of people discussing things, a lot of what is said is pure nonsense. It's garbage. But the tendency of garbage to emerge and even to spread in the short term does not say that over the long term, what sticks is not the valuable ideas. So there's a high tendency for novelty to be created in the cultural space, but there's also a high tendency for it to go extinct. And you have to keep that in mind. It's not like the genome, right? Everything is happening at a much higher rate. Things are being created, they're being destroyed. And I can't say that, obviously we've seen totalitarianism arise many times, and it's very destructive each time it does. So it's not like, hey, freedom to come up with any idea you want hasn't produced a whole lot of carnage. But the question is, over time, does it produce more open, fairer, more decent societies? And I believe that it does. I can't prove it, but that does seem to be the pattern.
I believe so as well. The thing is, in the short term, freedom of speech, absolute freedom of speech can be quite destructive. But you nevertheless have to hold on to that, because in the long term, I think you and I guess, are optimistic in the sense that good ideas will win out.
I don't know how strongly I believe that it will work, but I will say I haven't heard a better idea.
Yeah.
I would also point out that there's something very significant in this question of the hubris involved in imagining that you're going to improve the discussion by censoring, which is the majority of concepts at the fringe are nonsense. That's automatic. But the heterodoxy at the fringe, which is indistinguishable at the beginning from the nonsense ideas, is the key to progress. So if you decide, hey, the fringe is 99% garbage, let's just get rid of it, right? Hey, that's a strong win. We're getting rid of 99% garbage for 1% something or other. And the point is, yeah, but that 1% something or other is the key. You're throwing out the key. And so that's what YouTube is doing. Frankly, I think at the point that it started censoring my channel, you know, in the immediate aftermath of this major reversal for lab leak, it should have looked at itself and said, well, what the hell are we doing? Who are we censoring? We're censoring somebody who was just right, in a conflict with the very same people on whose behalf we are now censoring, right? That should have caused them to wake up.
So you said one approach, if you're on YouTube, is to basically let all videos go that do not violate the law.
Well, I should fix that, okay? I believe that that is the basic principle.
Yeah.
Eric makes an excellent point about the distinction between ideas and personal attacks, doxing, these other things. So I agree, there's no value in allowing people to destroy each other's lives, even if there's a technical legal defense for it. Now, how you draw that line, I don't know. But you know, what I'm talking about is, yes, people should be free to traffic in bad ideas, and they should be free to expose that the ideas are bad, and hopefully that process results in better ideas winning out.
Yeah, there's an interesting line between, you know, ideas like the earth is flat, which I believe you should not censor, and then like you start to encroach on like personal attacks. So not you know, doxing, yes, but like not even getting to that. Like there's a certain point where it's like that's no longer ideas, that's somehow not productive, even if it's it feels like believing the earth is flat is somehow productive, because maybe there's a tiny percent chance it is. You know, like it just feels like personal attacks. It doesn't well, you know, I'm torn on this because there's assholes in this world, there's fraudulent people in this world, so sometimes personal attacks are useful to reveal that, but there's a line you can cross. Like there's a comedy where people make fun of others. I think that's amazing, that's very powerful, and that's very useful, even if it's painful. But then there's like, once it gets to be, yeah, there's a certain line, it's a gray area where you cross, where it's no longer, in any possible world, productive. And that's a really weird gray area for you to operate in, and it feels like it should be a crowdsourced thing where people vote on it. But then again, do you trust the majority to vote on what is crossing the line and not? I mean, this is really interesting on this particular, like the scientific aspect of this. Do you think YouTube should take more of a stance, not censoring, but to actually have scientists within YouTube having these kinds of discussions, and then be able to almost speak out in a transparent way? This is what we're going to let this video stand, but here's all these other opinions. Almost like take a more active role in its recommendation system, in trying to present a full picture to you. Right now, they're not. The recommender systems are not human fine-tuned. They're all based on how you click, and there's this clustering algorithms. They're not taking an active role on giving you the full spectrum of ideas in the space of science. They just censor or not.
Well, at the moment, it's going to be pretty hard to compel me that these people should be trusted with any sort of curation or comment on matters of evidence, because they have demonstrated that they are incapable of doing it well. You could make such an argument, and I guess I'm open to the idea of institutions that would look something like YouTube, that would be capable of offering something valuable. I mean, and you know, even just the fact of them literally curating things and putting some videos next to others, you know, implies something.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a question to be answered, but at the moment, no. At the moment, what it is doing is quite literally putting not only individual humans in tremendous jeopardy by censoring discussion of useful tools and making tools that are more hazardous than has been acknowledged seem safe, right? But it is also placing humanity in danger of a permanent relationship with this pathogen. I cannot emphasize enough how expensive that is. It's effectively incalculable. If the relationship becomes permanent, the number of people who will ultimately suffer and die from it is indefinitely large.
Yeah, there's currently the algorithm is very rabbit hole driven, meaning if you click on the flat Earth videos, that's all you're going to be presented with, and you're not going to be nicely presented with arguments against the flat Earth. And the flip side of that, if you watch like quantum mechanics videos, or no, general relativity videos, it's very rare you're going to get a recommendation. Have you considered the Earth is flat?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you should have both.
Mm-hmm.
Same with vaccine videos that present the power and the incredible, like biology, genetics, virology about the vaccine. You're rarely going to get videos from well-respected scientific minds presenting possible dangers of the vaccine, and the vice versa is true as well. Which is, if you're looking at the dangers of the vaccine on YouTube, you're not going to get the highest quality of videos recommended to you. And I'm not talking about like manually inserted CDC videos that are like the most untrustworthy things you can possibly watch about how everybody should take the vaccine, it's the safest thing ever. No, it's about incredible, again, MIT colleagues of mine, incredible biologists, virologists that talk about the details of how the mRNA vaccines work and all those kinds of things. I think maybe this is me with the AI hat on, is I think the algorithm could fix a lot of this. And YouTube should build better algorithms and trust that and coupled with complete freedom of speech, to expand what people are able to think about, present always varied views, not balanced in some artificial way, hard-coded way, but balanced in a way that's crowdsourced. I think that's an algorithm problem that could be solved, because then you can delegate it to the algorithm as opposed to this hard code censorship of basically creating artificial boundaries on what can and can't be discussed. Instead, creating a full spectrum of exploration that can be done, and trusting the intelligence of people to do the exploration.
Well, there's a lot there. I would say we have to keep in mind that we're talking about a publicly held company with shareholders and obligations to them, and that may make it impossible. And I remember many years ago, back in the early days of Google, I remember a sense of terror at the loss of general search. Right? It used to be that Google, if you searched, came up with the same thing for everyone. And then it got personalized. And for a while, it was possible to turn off the personalization, which was still not great, because if everybody else is looking at a personalized search and you can tune into one that isn't personalized, that doesn't tell you why the world is sounding the way it is. But nonetheless, it was at least an option. And then that vanished. And the problem is, I think this is literally deranging us. That in effect, I mean, what you're describing is unthinkable. It is unthinkable that in the face of a campaign to vaccinate people in order to reach herd immunity, that YouTube would give you videos on hazards of vaccines, when this is, how hazardous the vaccines are is an unsettled question.
Why is it unthinkable? That doesn't make any sense. From a company perspective, if intelligent people in large amounts are open-minded and are thinking through the hazards and the benefits of a vaccine, a company should find the best videos to present what people are thinking about.
Well, let's come up with a hypothetical. Okay, let's come up with a very deadly disease for which there's a vaccine that is very safe, though not perfectly safe. And we are then faced with YouTube trying to figure out what to do for somebody searching on vaccine safety. Suppose it is necessary, in order to drive the pathogen to extinction, something like smallpox, that people get on board with the vaccine. But there's a tiny fringe of people who thinks that the vaccine is a mind control agent. Right? So should YouTube direct people to the only claims against this vaccine, which is that it's a mind control agent, when in fact the vaccine is very safe, whatever that means? If that were the actual configuration of the puzzle, then YouTube would be doing active harm, pointing you to this other video potentially. Now, yes, I would love to live in a world where people are up to the challenge of sorting that out, but my basic point would be, if it's an evidentiary question, and there's essentially no evidence that the vaccine is a mind control agent, and there's plenty of evidence that the vaccine is safe, then, well, you look for this video, we're going to give you this one, puts it on a par, right? So for the mind that's tracking how much thought is there behind it's safe versus how much thought is there behind it's a mind control agent will result in artificially elevating this. Now, in the current case, what we've seen is not this at all. We have seen evidence obscured in order to create a false story about safety, and we saw the inverse with ivermectin. We saw a campaign to portray the drug as more dangerous and less effective than the evidence clearly suggested it was. So we're not talking about a comparable thing, but I guess my point is the algorithmic solution that you point to creates a problem of its own, which is that it means that the way to get exposure is to generate something fringy. If you're the only thing on some fringe, then suddenly YouTube would be recommending those things, and that's obviously a gameable system at best.
Yeah, but the solution to that, I know you're creating a thought experiment, maybe playing a little bit of a devil's advocate. I think the solution to that is not to limit the algorithm in the case of the super deadly virus. It's for the scientists to step up and become better communicators, more charismatic, is fight the battle of ideas. So create better videos. You know, like if the virus is truly deadly, you have a lot more ammunition, a lot more data, a lot more material to work with in terms of communicating with the public. So be better at communicating and stop being. You have to start trusting the intelligence of people and also being transparent and playing the game of the internet, which is like, what is the internet hungry for? I believe authenticity. Stop looking like you're full of shit. It's the scientific community. If there's any flaw that I currently see, especially the people that are in public office, that like Anthony Fauci, they look like they're full of shit. And I know they're brilliant. Why don't they look more authentic? So they're losing that game, and I think a lot of people observing this entire system now, younger scientists, are seeing this and saying, okay, if I want to continue being a scientist in the public eye, and I want to be effective at my job, I'm going to have to be a lot more authentic. So they're learning the lesson. This evolutionary system is working. So there's just a younger generation of minds coming up that I think will do a much better job in this battle of ideas, that when the much more dangerous virus comes along, they'll be able to be better communicators. At least that's the hope. The using the algorithm to control that is I feel like is a big problem. So you're going to have the same problem with a deadly virus as with the current virus if you let YouTube draw hard lines by the PR and the marketing people versus the broad community of scientists.
Well, in some sense, you're suggesting something that's close kin to what I was saying about, freedom of expression ultimately provides an advantage to better ideas. So I'm in agreement, broadly speaking. But I would also say there's probably some sort of, let's imagine the world that you propose where YouTube shows you the alternative point of view. That has the problem that I suggest, but one thing you could do is you could give us the tools to understand what we're looking at, right? You could give us, so first of all, there's something, I think, myopic, solipsistic, narcissistic about an algorithm that serves shareholders by showing you what you want to see rather than what you need to know, right? That's the distinction, is flattering you, playing to your blind spot is something that algorithm will figure out, but it's not healthy for us all to have Google playing to our blind spot. It's very, very dangerous. So what I really want is analytics that allow me, or maybe options and analytics. The options should allow me to see what alternative perspectives are being explored, right? So here's the thing I'm searching, and it leads me down this road, right? Let's say it's ivermectin, okay? I find all of this evidence that ivermectin works. I find all of these discussions and people talk about various protocols and this and that, and then I could say, all right, what is the other side? And I could see who is searching, not as individuals, but what demographics are searching alternatives. And maybe you could even combine it with something Reddit-like, where effectively, let's say that there was a position that, I don't know, that a vaccine is a mind control device, and you could have a steelman this argument competition effectively, and the better answers that steelman it as well as possible would rise to the top. And so you could read the top 3 or 4 explanations about why this really credibly is a mind control product, and you could say, well, that doesn't really add up. I can check these 3 things myself, and they can't possibly be right. Right? And you could dismiss it. And then, as an argument that was credible, let's say plate tectonics, before that was an accepted concept, you'd say, wait a minute. There is evidence for plate tectonics. As crazy as it sounds that the continents are floating around on liquid, actually, that's not so implausible. You know, we've got these subduction zones, we've got geology that is compatible, we've got puzzle piece continents that seem to fit together. Wow, that's a surprising amount of evidence for that position, so I'm going to file some Bayesian probability with it that's updated for the fact that actually the steelman argument's better than I was expecting, right? So I could imagine something like that where, I would love the search to be indifferent to who's searching, right? The solipsistic thing is too dangerous. So the search could be general, so we would all get a sense for what everybody else was seeing too. And then some layer that didn't have anything to do with what YouTube points you to or not, but allowed you to see, you know, the general pattern of adherence to searching for information, and again, a layer in which those things could be defended so you could hear what a good argument sounded like rather than just hear a caricatured argument.
Yeah, and also reward people, creators that have demonstrated like a track record of open-mindedness and correctness as much as it can be measured over a long term, and sort of, I mean, a lot of this maps to incentivizing good long-term behavior, not immediate kind of dopamine rush kind of signals. I think ultimately the algorithm on the individual level should optimize for personal growth, long-term happiness, just growth intellectually, growth in terms of lifestyle, personally, and so on, as opposed to immediate. I think that's going to build a better society. Not even just like truth, because I think truth is a complicated thing. It's more just you growing as a person, exploring the space of ideas, changing your mind often, increasing the level to which you're open-minded, the knowledge base you're operating from, the willingness to empathize with others, all those kinds of things the algorithm should optimize for. Like creating a better human at the individual level, that I think that's a great business model, because the person that's using this tool will then be happier with themselves for having used it, and it'll be a lifelong quote-unquote customer. I think it's a great business model to make a happy, open-minded, knowledgeable, better human being.
It's a terrible business model under the current system. What you want is to build the system in which it is a great business model.
Why is it a terrible model?
Because it will be decimated by those who play to the short term.
I don't think so. Why?
I mean, I think we're living it. We're living it.
Well, no, because if you have the alternative that presents itself, it points out the emperor has no clothes. I mean, it
Right.
points out that YouTube is operating in this way, Twitter is operating in this way,
So-
Facebook is operating in this way.
How long term would you like the wisdom to prove out?
Well, even a week is better than what's currently happening.
Right, but the problem is, you know, if a week loses out to an hour, right? And
I don't think it loses out. It loses out in the short term.
that's my point.
But if you're a great communicator and you basically say, look, here's the metrics, and a lot of it is like how people actually feel. Like this is what people experience with social media. They look back at the previous month and say, I felt shitty on a lot of days because of social media.
Right.
Like if you look back at the previous few weeks and say, wow, I'm a better person because of that month happened, they immediately choose the product that's going to lead to that. That's what love for products looks like. If you love, like a lot of people love their Tesla car, like that's, or iPhone, or like beautiful design. That's what love looks
Yeah,
like.
they're
I
all
look
working
back,
for it.
I'm a better person for having used this thing.
Well, you gotta ask yourself
Unbelievable.
the question though: if this is such a great business model, why isn't it evolving? Why don't we see it?
Honestly, it's competence.
I can't
See,
get the
people are
bird, but
just, it's
that's
not,
a hell of
it's
a
not
beak
easy
right
to
here.
build new, it's not
I
easy
can't
to
get a bird out
build
of it though.
products, tools, systems on new ideas. It's kind of a new idea. We've gone through this, everything we're seeing now comes from the ideas of the initial birth of the internet. There just needs to be new sets of tools that are incentivizing long-term personal growth and happiness. That's it.
Right, but what we have is a market that doesn't favor this, right? I mean, for one thing, we had an alternative to Facebook, right? That looked, you owned your own data, it wasn't exploitative, and Facebook bought a huge interest in it, and it died. I mean, who do you know who's on Diaspora?
The execution there was not good.
Right, but it could have gotten better, right?
I don't think that the argument that why hasn't somebody done it, a good argument for it's not going to completely destroy all of Twitter and Facebook when somebody does it, or Twitter will catch up and pivot to the algorithm.
This is not what I'm saying. There's obviously great ideas that remain unexplored because nobody has gotten to the foothill that would allow you to explore them. That's true, but an internet that was non-predatory is an obvious idea, and many of us know that we want it. And many of us have seen prototypes of it, and we don't move because there's no audience there, so the network